Hey everyone, Ross Marchand, Vice President of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, and joining me today to discuss all matters L-band, Federal Communications Commission, internet connectivity is AEI scholar Roslyn Layton. So Roslyn, there is a lot to unpack from recent news and developments. On April 20th, you had the Federal Communications Commission vote unanimously to allow this company called Legato to move ahead to use a critical bit of mid-band spectrum known as the L-band to accelerate 5G deployment in the US. So what does this mean for the future of internet connectivity in this country?
Well, Ross, thank you so much for having me at TPA today. I'm a huge fan of your organization, and we have worked together on a lot of issues around bringing accountability to taxpayers and also helping enterprise and getting the private sector in America to invest and innovate. And I know we share those goals. And this decision, unanimous decision by the FCC to support the license modifications for a company called Legato Technologies. It is a connectivity company offering satellite and terrestrial communications in what you call the L-band. It is going exactly along those lines, private sector enterprise to use an innovative use of our spectrum resources. And so that was a great thing in April. It's important for a couple of reasons. Number one is this decision was unanimous. The five commissioners of the FCC, Republican and Democrat, particularly in this environment when you get everybody on the same page around connectivity, that's important, number one. Historically, our broadband decisions have generally been bipartisan, but things in recent years have gotten more, maybe people taking sides. But this is a case, it's something that's been in front of the FCC for a long time. And finally, after thousands of hours of testing and review and input from 16 agencies across federal government, FCC said, we're going forward. So that's really important. You also saw the tech policy community from left and right across the whole spectrum. People came out in support of this. It was really great to see. We had, people who were normally not on the same sides of things agreed on this decision. So we had scholars from AEI joining those from Public Knowledge or New America Foundation, Citizens Against Government Waste, Competitive Enterprise Institute. So many organizations all agree that this was a great it's a great decision by the FCC. And then I guess the final point, which is important to say, is this was also helping the FCC action what's called mid-band spectrum. You talk about the L-band, and just quickly for your listeners, there's three kinds of spectrum, low band, mid-band, and high band. And they have different physical properties depending upon your what it is you want to do. Low band spectrum sends data over a long distance, but it's limited in what it can carry. High band spectrum can deliver a lot of data over a short distance. But the L band or the mid band, that's called the Goldilocks spectrum, because this has the perfect blend of distance and volume and capacity all in one. And we are limited overall in the US having enough mid-band spectrum for 5G. The carriers don't have an equal distribution. T-Mobile probably has the most. It has the most spectrum of any carrier, in fact. And let's hope this they'll be moving their new merger with Sprint. But so to get more mid-band spectrum working for 5G is an important thing to do because most of the mid-band spectrum, the beachfront as it's called, is held by the federal government. We don't have a good sense of how well it's used. It's they're limited in what we can share. So that this decision this Legato decision is important for many reasons.
Sure, important for many reasons, critical for internet connectivity in the US, but unfortunately, since that April 20th decision by the FCC, you've had unwarranted non-jurisdictional pushback by the Department of Defense and other federal agencies. So what is going on there, and what do you make of the allegations levied by the Department of Defense charging that this decision was hasty, it was untransparent, and it had all these unsavory characteristics? Do you buy these arguments by the Department of Defense?
Yes, well, so for one thing, this spectrum has been held by what was Legato's earlier another company called Light Squared for over 30 years, and it has been in front of the FCC for 17 years. So they've gone through literally years of modifying the license to get the right balance to make sure that the transmissions don't interfere with it's called Global Positioning System, GPS. But specifically, to answer your question around connectivity, when we talk about these different uses of spectrum, what Legato is trying to do is to bring connectivity in to industries such as manufacturing, to railroads, precision agriculture, the energy industry. These are really important in rural America. It's important for jobs. And it's to bring what's called the Internet of Things. It's the next level. It's what we want to do with 5G, not just consumer broadband. Obviously, that's part of the competition that 5G is driving. If you don't like you have a wireline connection at home, you're not satisfied, you can switch to 5G and get, your video through the air at an even faster rate. So 5G, in addition to that consumer part, has a very important enterprise and industrial component, which is to allow America's industries to be even more efficient and competitive. So that's all well and good. As you mentioned, there was some pushback, particularly from Department of Defense, which actually contradicts their position in the past, where they actually wanted to be encouraging of industry, to be able to say, we as a Department of Defense, we have particular needs for spectrum, for radar, for navigation, but we don't want to categorically stop, applications that are going to emerge. And they had a memorandum of understanding with the different agencies of government. Unfortunately, in the past decade, the DoD has fallen behind on managing the upgrades of GPS. GPS, everybody uses GPS. It's a critical application. It was invented by American military. It is managed by them. But the process to upgrade GPS has fallen woefully behind. Maybe some suggest as many as 23 years behind. So what we learned from DoD is that they won't be ready with their military grade GPS until 2035. So they are concerned that new applications may get in the way of their war fighting and whatnot. But this is not an issue with regard to Legato, because this is only in the United States. And obviously we don't want to have any wars going on in the US, but the modifications that the FCC made include a 23 megahertz band, guard band, which ensures that there's no transmissions outside of the band of the spectrum that Legato is holding. And on top of that, it's lowered the power levels 99%. So this ensures it won't get in the direction of communications with airplanes, for example, and drones, other of things such as that nature. So that is part of why this decision took a long time. The order itself is 144 pages. It's extremely detailed on making sure all of these technical parameters are satisfied so that no other services will be harmed.
Right. And it seems, based on everything that you're saying, everything I personally read on this topic, that the DoD is just, they continue to put forward these criticisms and these objections despite any sort of lack, any evidence or lack thereof whatsoever. But despite that, despite their objections not holding any water, on May 6th, you had the Senate Armed Services Committee holding a hearing on this issue, really with just DoD stakeholders. No one from Legato or private industry or the FCC was present. So how did that lack of balance impact the hearing and some of the claims presented at the hearing?
Well, it's quite unfortunate to see, it certainly is not anything negative about, America's armed forces, all of the soldiers and the people who work to protect our country every day, who deserve the utmost respect. And but this is something very different from, some members of the top brass who I think, frankly, are embarrassed because of this delay on the GPS project, wanting to distract attention from it. And in any case, using a different Senate committee that isn't even responsible, it's not even the jurisdiction whatsoever with commercial spectrum. I mean, by law, we have, over 80 years, we have developed a federal communications policy for commercial companies that where the FCC has the jurisdiction and authority. This is something that has been developed with so much work and so much law to understand what the FCC's role is supposed to be. And when it makes its decisions, it can take into account concerns from other agencies, but it ultimately is responsible to make the decision that it must in the particular case in front of it. Now, you're referring to a hearing that happened in Congress in the Senate Armed Service Committee. It only featured representatives from Department of Defense, no one from the FCC or Legato. Obviously it was clear to everyone, even the senators on that committee, that this was a one-sided hearing. It didn't have, the due process or the exchange of views that it needed. So obviously, senators from both sides of the aisle have said, this is not going to pass muster. We're going back to the FCC. We're going to see all of the steps that they've taken. And if, in fact, this piece of spectrum we're talking about, it might be one of the most examined pieces of spectrum in American history. I mean, you had literally 3 or 4 federal agencies conducting major tests, thousands of hours of study. In fact, the DoD designed the test to study whether there would be interference. It used one of the national laboratories to perform it. So it has been studied and has shown that there is no harm, will not be harm to military devices. And that's really key. Nevertheless, the DoD had that hearing, but I think that if anything is sort of transparent to everyone that this, when you look at the evidence and the data, it's not the best look for them, and particularly because the Commerce Committee in the Senate, which really has jurisdiction here, they may have their own hearing, and then of course they will bring in the relevant parties to say, what do you make of these concerns? It's unfortunate to see this kind of a conflict at a very important time where 5G is a national security issue. We have a major competition in China. They are unfortunately ahead of us on mid-band spectrum. They have more allocated. They have more base stations and towers erected. So we have to catch up in that way, even though the U.S. is quite ahead in terms of, we have four or five, actually 5 carriers who can do 5G versus just 3 in China. And we, of course, have market provision, not government state-owned entities doing it. So, of course, the U.S. has many advantages. But if we want to beat China in telecommunications, in the connected Internet of Things and consumer broadband, we have to get moving on mid-band spectrum. And, again, another thing just yesterday at the FCC, allowing existing 4G towers to be used for 5G. I mean, this is, it's a related issue, but there's so many things that have to happen when we go from 4G to 5G, and everybody should get on board with that.
Right, and clearly a pressing issue, and and I repeat, a lot of information to digest. So where can we go to find out more information about this issue?
Yes, well, obviously, the FCC itself, if you want to find out about the Legato order, I think there's a nice summary. If you just go to the FCC website, fcc.gov, you can put Legato into the search bar. But you can also check out our letter. It's 4 pages that both TPA signed, scholars from AEI. That's on Public Knowledge's website. Again, another display of our, multiple interests of people across the board working together to recognize the importance of enterprise, private investment, innovation, moving forward, connectivity. Those are 2 particularly good areas. Myself, I have a column on Forbes.com. You can look up Roslyn Layton. I've covered this in a number of stories, and I cover other issues around broadband as well.
All right, well, that about wraps it up. Thank you so much, Roslyn. Stay tuned. I'm sure there are plenty more developments coming down the pike. Thanks.